I have lived over half a century to learn that betrayal is rarely loud, it whispers. One afternoon that seemed ordinary tore my family apart. My son-in-law sold the house out from under my daughter and left her with nothing. He thinks he has won, because I am just a 56-year-old widow. But he made a fatal mistake, choosing the wrong mother to deceive. My name is Margaret Holloway, but most people who respect the hard lines on my face call me Maggie. At 56 years old, I have curated a life of silence in the suburbs of Tacoma, Washington. It is a disciplined existence, built on the same principles I used for 30 years as an operations manager at Northline Transit Group. You keep things organized. You keep things moving. You do not let emotions clog the supply chain of your daily routine. Since my husband passed, the house has been quiet, a museum of memories I dust but rarely touch. I thought I had found peace in the solitude, but I should have known that silence is often just the pause before a crash. My daughter, Eleanor, lives nearly 300 miles away in Spokane. Ellie is 31, a soft-hearted woman who loves too easily, a trait she did not inherit from me. She married Daniel Brooks 3 years ago. Daniel is a man who wears expensive suits and smiles with his teeth but never his eyes. He is polite. He opens doors. He remembers birthdays. On paper, he is the perfect son-in-law. But I spent 3 decades reading manifests and spotting discrepancies in shipping logs, and Daniel always felt like a shipment with missing paperwork. The call came at 2:14 in the morning. The ringer shattered the stillness of my bedroom. I fumbled for the phone, my heart already hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. No good news travels at that hour. "Hello?" I answered, my voice thick with sleep. "Mom?" It was Ellie. Her voice was thin, brittle, like dry leaves stepping on pavement. "Ellie, what is it? Are you hurt?" I sat up, switching on the bedside lamp. The light was harsh and blinding. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing, jagged and shallow. "Mom, I'm fine. I don't know why I called." "Where is Daniel?" I asked, my instincts sharpening instantly. "He's asleep. I didn't mean to wake you. I just felt cold. Go back to sleep. Mom? Ellie? Talk to me. What is wrong?" "Nothing, really. I'm sorry. I love you." The line went dead before I could say another word. I stared at the phone, the silence of the room rushing back in, heavier than before. "I'm fine. I think." That was not a sentence spoken by a woman who was safe. That was the sentence of a woman trying to convince herself she was still standing. I did not go back to sleep. I went to the kitchen and made coffee strong enough to wake the dead. By 4:30 in the morning, I was packing a bag. I threw in practical clothes, toiletries, and the spare key to Ellie's apartment that she had given me years ago. I did not call her back to warn her I was coming. In logistics, you learn that if you announce an inspection, people hide the mess. I got into my sedan and pointed it east, toward the Cascade Mountains. The drive from Tacoma to Spokane is long, shifting from the grey, wet cling of the coast to the dry, open expanse of the eastern side. I drove in silence. The road stretched out like a grey ribbon, and with every mile, memories I had suppressed began to surface. I thought about my own marriage. I thought about the times I had said I was fine when I was drowning. I thought about the small compromises I made that eventually cost me my voice. I had let my husband make decisions that chipped away at my security, all in the name of keeping the peace. I recognized the tone in Ellie's voice because I had heard it in my own head 1,000 times. It was the sound of a woman realizing she was no longer the captain of her own life. By the time I hit the city limits of Spokane, the sun was high, but a cold shadow lay over my heart. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. This was not a social visit. This was a rescue mission, even if Ellie did not know it yet. I had a feeling in my gut, dark and heavy, that the polite, smiling man my daughter married had finally stopped pretending. I just hoped I was not too late to stop whatever he had started. The brick building on West Riverside Avenue looked exactly as I remembered it, solid and reassuring against the greying Spokane sky. It was a converted warehouse, trendy and expensive, the kind of place Daniel loved because it signaled status. I parked my car across the street and stared up at the windows of Unit 4B. The blinds were drawn tight. There was no warm glow of a lamp, no movement of a silhouette. Just a blank, unblinking stare. I walked to the front entrance and pressed the buzzer for their unit. Silence. I pressed it again, holding the button down longer this time. Nothing. I fished the spare key from my purse, the metal cold against my palm, and slid it into the lock of the main vestibule door. It stopped halfway. It did not turn. I jiggled it, pulled it back, and tried again with a little more force. The lock remained unyielding. They had changed the cylinders. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I walked around to the side entrance where the building manager's office was located. Gary, a man I had met a few times during holidays, was sitting behind his desk, sorting through mail. He looked up, his face registering confusion before recognition set in. "Mrs. Holloway," he asked, standing up. "What are you doing here?" "I came to surprise Ellie," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "My key doesn't work." "Gary." "Did they change the locks?" Gary looked down at his desk, avoiding my eyes. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Mrs. Holloway. They don't live here anymore. The air left my lungs." "What do you mean?" "This is their home. The unit was sold," Gary said softly. "The closing was finalized 3 weeks ago. The new owners moved in last Monday." "Sold." I repeated the word as if it were a foreign language. Ellie never mentioned selling. "Who signed the papers? Ellie is on the deed." Gary sighed and pulled a folder from a filing cabinet behind him. He hesitated before answering. Daniel signed. He handled everything. He said, well, he produced a power of attorney document. He told the board that Ellie was going through a severe mental health episode and could not handle the stress of the transaction. He signed on her behalf. My blood ran cold. A mental health episode. That is what he said. He had the notary stamp and everything. It looked legal. "Maggie, I'm sorry. I walked out of the office before my knees could give way. I needed air." I stood on the sidewalk, the wind biting at my face. "Sold 3 weeks ago. While I was drinking coffee in Tacoma thinking my daughter was safe, her husband was selling the roof over her head. I saw a woman walking a small terrier near the entrance. It was Mrs. Gable, their next-door neighbor. She stopped when she saw me, her expression shifting to one of pity. Pity is a useless emotion, but right now, it was a source of information. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, clutching the leash tight. I didn't think I'd see you here." "Tell me what happened," I said. I did not frame it as a request. It was an order. "It was awful," she whispered, glancing at the building as if the bricks could hear her. "About a month ago, the fighting started. Not loud screaming, but heavy thuds, slamming doors. Then, 3 weeks ago, I saw Daniel moving boxes out late at night, like 2 or 3 in the morning, and Ellie. She left the next day. She didn't have any boxes. Mrs. Holloway. She just had 2 suitcases and a backpack. She looked terrified. She was crying so hard she couldn't breathe. I asked her if she needed help, and she just shook her head and got into a taxi. She looked like she was running for her life. Did Daniel go with her? No. Mrs. Gable said. He stayed behind to meet the movers. He was whistling. I remember thinking that was so strange. He was whistling while his wife was falling apart. I thanked her and walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and locked the doors. The silence of the car felt like a containment unit. I closed my eyes and breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth. Panic serves no one. Panic causes mistakes. Ellie had not just left. She had been evicted from her own life. Daniel had used the law, a power of attorney, to strip her of her assets while painting her as unstable to the outside world. He had sold the house, taken the money, and sent her away with 2 suitcases. This was not a sudden decision. Real estate transactions take time. Getting a power of attorney signed takes manipulation. He had been planning this for months. He had engineered her breakdown to facilitate his payday. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a fresh, black notebook and a pen. I opened it to the first page. At the top, I wrote the date. Underneath, I wrote, Fact 1, Apartment 4B, sold 3 weeks ago. Fact 2, Daniel Brooks exercised power of attorney claiming mental incapacity. Fact 3, Eleanor left under duress. I capped the pen. My hands were no longer shaking. I was not just a mother anymore. I was an investigator, and I had a file to build. I found her at Sarah's house in the South Hill district. Sarah was Ellie's college roommate, a fiercely loyal woman who opened the door with a look of relief that quickly crumbled into exhaustion when she saw me. She did not say a word, just stepped aside and pointed toward the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. Ellie was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at a wall that held nothing but a generic watercolor painting. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her posture was collapsed, her shoulders drawn in as if she were trying to occupy as little space in the world as possible. When she turned to look at me, her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, devoid of the spark that usually defined my daughter. "Mom," she whispered. How did you know?" I sat beside her and wrapped my arms around her. She was trembling, a fine, constant vibration that travelled from her bones to mine. "It does not matter how I knew," I said softly, stroking her hair. "I am here. Tell me everything." It took an hour to get the story out. It came in fragments, broken by sobs and ragged breaths. It was not a story of sudden violence or a drunken mistake. It was a story of a slow, calculated dismantling of a human being. He told me we were in trouble. "Mom," Ellie said, wiping her nose with a crumpled tissue. "About 4 months ago, he said his investments had taken a hit and that we were at risk of losing everything if we didn't protect the assets. He created this whole crisis. He would come home late, looking stressed, refusing to eat. He made me feel like the sky was falling. I felt a cold rage settling in my chest, heavy and solid like a stone. And that is when he asked for the signature." Ellie nodded, tears spilling over again. He called it asset restructuring. He said if I signed a power of attorney, he could move the deed and the savings into a holding trust to protect it from creditors. He said it was temporary. He said he was doing it to save us. And you believed him. Why wouldn't I? Ellie looked at me, her face twisted in anguish. He's my husband. He cried. Mom. He literally cried in my lap and told me he was terrified of failing me. He said, Ellie, please trust me. I can fix this. So I signed. I signed everything he put in front of me. She took a shuddering breath. Last Tuesday. I went to work. He kissed me goodbye. He said, I love you. Elle, tonight will be better. When I came home, the key didn't work. The locks were changed. I called him, and his number was disconnected. Then I got an email. Just a notification from the bank that our joint savings account had been closed. 0 balance. The house was sold 2 weeks ago. Mom. He sold it while we were sleeping in it. I closed my eyes for a second, forcing myself to remain the anchor she needed. This was not just a bad breakup. This was a financial execution. Daniel had not just left her. He had harvested her life for resources. He was not a husband. He was a predator who had spent 3 years fattening his prey. He took everything. Ellie sobbed, burying her face in her hands. The equity, the emergency fund, my grandmother's jewelry. He left me with nothing but my credit card debt. I'm so stupid. I'm so incredibly stupid. Stop it, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I softened it immediately. You are not stupid, Eleanor. You are loyal. You were manipulated by a professional liar. There is a difference. I can't sue him, she whispered, shaking her head violently. I can't face him in court. Everyone will know. Everyone will see that I let him do this. I signed the papers. Mum, it's legal. He won. I looked at my daughter, broken and humiliated, convinced that her kindness was a defect. She was too weak to fight. She was drowning in shame, paralyzed by the narrative he had spun. But I was not. I had spent 30 years managing logistics, dealing with breached contracts, and spotting theft in the supply chain. I knew that what looks legal on paper is often criminal in intent. You do not have to sue him, I said, pulling the blanket up around her shoulders. You do not have to do anything right now but breathe and eat. Let me worry about Daniel. What are you going to do? She asked, looking at me with fear in her eyes. I am going to fix the paperwork. I lied. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the streetlights were flickering on. Daniel Brooks believed he had committed the perfect crime because he had targeted a woman who loved him too much to fight back. He had calculated the profit margin of my daughter's heart, but he had failed to account for the mother who built that heart. He had started a war, and he had no idea he was already losing. I needed a shark, not a therapist. That is why I called Thomas Keegan. Thomas was a corporate litigator who had pivoted to forensic accounting after his own divorce left him bitter and broke. He was the kind of man who looked at a spreadsheet and saw a crime scene. We met in his office, a sterile room in downtown Spokane that smelled of stale coffee and toner. I handed him the stack of papers I had salvaged from Ellie's digital cloud backup bank statements, the power of attorney copy, and the closing documents from the house sale. Thomas spent 20 minutes in silence, his eyes darting back and forth across the pages. Finally, he leaned back and took off his glasses. Maggie, he said, his voice low and serious. This is masterful. Evil. But masterful. Tell me where the money went. Thomas, I said, keeping my hands clasped on the table to stop them from shaking. The house sold for $450,000. After the mortgage was paid off, There was exactly $182,000 in equity. That money was wire transferred the same day to an LLC called Apex Horizons. It looks like a legitimate investment firm, but I dug a little deeper. It is a shell company for a high-risk speculative real estate project in Nevada, a project that is currently desperate for liquidity. So he gambled my daughter's home on a risky bet. I said, "It is worse than that," Thomas said, tapping the power of attorney document. "Look at the date. The notary stamp says this was signed on October 12th. But look at the metadata on the digital file Daniel emailed to the bank. It was created on October 14th. He likely had the document notarized without Ellie present. Or he has a friend who is a notary and willing to bend the rules. This wasn't just authorized. It was fabricated." I felt a coldness spread through my veins. It was the icy clarity I used to feel when a shipment went missing, and I realized it was an inside job. I spent the next 6 hours in Thomas's office, treating my daughter's life like a forensic audit. We went through Daniel's old emails, which Ellie still had access to on her laptop because he had forgotten to log out of the mail client. What we found was a map of premeditated destruction. There were emails dating back 6 months, inquiring about asset shielding and divorce loopholes. But the final blow came from a folder labeled Venues. I opened it and stared at the screen. It was a correspondence with a wedding planner in Coeur d'Alene. The date for the ceremony was set for 2 months from now. The bride's name was listed as Vanessa. "He is getting married?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Thomas looked over my shoulder and let out a sharp breath. "He is not just getting married, Maggie. He is merging assets. If he marries this Vanessa woman and moves the funds into a joint trust before you file a claim, unraveling it becomes a nightmare. He is washing the money through a new marriage." I sat back, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. Daniel had not just discarded Ellie, he had replaced her. He had secured his next host before he had even finished draining the first one. The sheer efficiency of it was terrifying. He was treating women like stepping stones, burning one to build the bridge to the next. "We can file an injunction immediately," Thomas said, reaching for his phone. "We can freeze the accounts." "No," I said, stopping his hand. Thomas looked at me, confused. "Maggie, he is spending the money. If we wait, it might be gone. If we strike now, he claims it was a bad investment. He claims he had the power of attorney and made a mistake. He gets a slap on the wrist. And Ellie gets nothing but legal fees," I said, my mind racing through the scenarios. "He is arrogant. Thomas. He thinks Ellie is too broken to fight. He thinks I am just a grieving old widow. He feels safe." I stood up and gathered the papers. "We do not attack him while he is hiding in the shadows," I said. "We wait until he feels so secure that he steps into the light. We wait until he thinks he has won. That is dangerous." Thomas warned. "You are playing with fire." "I am not playing, Thomas," I replied, walking to the door. "I am managing risk. Daniel wants a new life. Fine. I am going to let him build it up, brick by brick, just so I can be the one to pull the foundation out from under him." I waited until Tuesday morning to make the call. It was 10 o'clock. The time of day a self-important man feels most invincible. I sat in my rental car, staring at Daniel's number on my screen. I needed to be the mother-in-law he remembered, quiet, practical, and ultimately deferential to men in suits. I pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring. "Maggie." His voice was smooth, calm, and utterly devoid of guilt. I was wondering when I would hear from you. Daniel? I said, forcing a wobble into my voice. I just spoke to Ellie. I am so confused. She is saying terrible things. Daniel? She says she is homeless. He let out a long, heavy sigh, the sound of a man carrying a burden no one appreciates. I know. It breaks my heart. Maggie. She is not well. I tried to shield you from it, but her mental state has been deteriorating for months. The paranoia, the erratic spending. I had to make some hard choices to save us from total bankruptcy. I do not know what to believe. I said, I need to see you. I need you to explain this to me face to face. Ellie is too emotional to make sense. Of course, he said, the relief evident in his tone. He thought he had me. He thought I was coming to him to be reassured. Come by the office. No, I said quickly. I am in town. But I don't want to be in a corporate building. Can we meet at the Daily Grind on 2nd Avenue? It is neutral ground. I chose the coffee shop for a specific reason. Washington requires two-party consent for recording conversations. But that expectation of privacy dissolves in a public space where voices carry. The Daily Grind was loud, chaotic, and crowded. It was a perfect courtroom. He walked in 20 minutes late, wearing a charcoal suit and looking like he had just stepped out of a magazine. He did not look like a man whose wife was sleeping on a futon. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. I had already started the recording app on my phone, which lay face down on the table between us. You look tired, Maggie, he said, sitting down without offering to buy me a coffee. I am worried. Daniel, I said, wringing my hands together. Ellie said you sold the house without telling her. She said she never signed the papers. Daniel laughed, a dismissive puff of air. Ellie doesn't know what she signed. That is the tragedy of it. Look, Maggie, I had an opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime buy-in for a development project in Nevada. I needed liquidity fast. The market was softening. So I acted. But the power of attorney? I pressed, keeping my voice low and grandmotherly. I thought that was for emergencies. Ellie said she didn't think it could be used for this. It is a tool. Maggie, he said, leaning forward, his eyes shining with the arrogance of a man who believes he is the smartest person in the room. And frankly, there were some hurdles. The bank was being sticky about the dates. They wanted a fresh signature, and Ellie was unavailable. So, I had to be a little creative. I held my breath. This was the moment. Creative? I asked. What do you mean I adjusted the dates? He said, dropping his voice slightly, but still audible over the clatter of cups. I had to tweak the notary acknowledgement to match the bank's timeline. It was just paperwork. Maggie. Administrative cleanup. If I hadn't done it, we would have lost the deal. I did it for her. You changed the dates on the legal documents, I clarified, ensuring the microphone caught every syllable. I did what was necessary to secure our future, he said, leaning back and crossing his arms. And it paid off. My partners are already projecting a 300% return. When Ellie snaps out of this episode, she will be thanking me from the deck of our new vacation home. I looked at him. I saw the hollow validation he craved. He did not see a mother protecting her child. He saw an audience for his brilliance. You really have it all figured out, don't you? Daniel, I said. I try. He smiled. Someone has to be the adult in the room. I reached out and picked up my phone. Well, thank you for being honest with me. It helps me understand exactly what I'm dealing with. Anytime. Maggie, he said, checking his watch. I have to run. Big meetings. He walked away without looking back. He had no idea that in his eagerness to impress a 56-year-old widow, he had just confessed to felony fraud. I stopped the recording and saved the file. The file name was simply The Noose. I sat across from Thomas as the recording played. Daniel's voice filled the room, arrogant and clear, boasting about his creative paperwork and administrative cleanup. When the recording ended, Thomas let out a low whistle and leaned back in his leather chair. That is the nail in the coffin. Maggie, Thomas said, taking off his glasses. He admitted to altering a notarized document to defraud a bank. That is not just civil fraud, that is criminal forgery. It is enough to stop him, I asked. It is enough to bury him, Thomas confirmed. But there is more. I did some digging into this Apex Horizons group. The Nevada project. It is already under scrutiny. The Securities and Exchange Commission has an open file on the developers. They are suspected of inflating land values to secure loans. It is a house of cards. Maggie. This was the leverage I needed. Daniel was not just a thief. He was a thief boarding a sinking ship. I decided to speed up the drowning process. That night, I sat at my laptop and composed an anonymous email to the primary partner listed on the Apex website, a man named Marcus Thorne. I attached the public records regarding the investigation and a simple note that read, "Check your liquidity. Your partner in Spokane is using fraudulent collateral." I did not have to wait long for the reaction. 48 hours later, the dominoes began to fall. Thomas called me with the update. Marcus Thorne had pulled his funding, citing compliance issues. Without the primary capital, the secondary investors panicked. The 300% return Daniel had bragged about evaporated overnight. Then, Daniel's phone calls started. He did not call me. He called Ellie. We were in Sarah's kitchen making tea when Ellie's phone buzzed on the counter. She looked at the screen, and her face went pale. "It's him," she whispered, her hand hovering over the device. "He's called 3 times in 10 minutes. "Do not answer it," I said, placing my hand firmly over hers. "But what if something is wrong?" He sent a text. It says, "Emergency. Pick up. We need to talk about the accounts." He is panicking. "Ellie," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "He is not calling because he misses you. He is calling because the money tap has run dry, and he needs you to sign something else to fix it. If you answer, you give him power. If you stay silent, he has to face the wall he built." Ellie stared at the phone as it buzzed again. I feel sick. Let it ring," I commanded gently. The buzzing stopped, only to be replaced by the beep of a voicemail. We listened to it on speaker. Daniel's voice was no longer smooth. It was high-pitched and rushed, the charm completely stripped away. "Ellie, pick up the damn phone. Look, there is a misunderstanding with the partners. I need you to verify the sale authorization. Just call me back. It is urgent. Do not be childish. Ellie, call me." He sounded like a man trying to hold back a landslide with his bare hands. "He is scared," Ellie said, looking at me with wide eyes. I have never heard him sound like that. He is realizing that he is not the smartest man in the room, I said. He is realizing he is just a man who stole money he cannot pay back. The pressure was mounting. Daniel was now fighting a war on 2 fronts. His investors were demanding answers he did not have, and the wife he had discarded was refusing to play the victim. He was cornered. I knew I could go to the police now. I had the recording. I had the fraud evidence. But I was not ready. In logistics, you do not ship the product until the route is perfectly clear. I wanted Daniel to feel the walls closing in completely. I wanted him to exhaust every lie, every excuse, and every dollar before I walked into that room and showed him exactly who had orchestrated his downfall. I was not just teaching him a lesson. I was ensuring he would never forget the name Holloway. The conference room at Keegan and Associates was designed to intimidate. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, a long mahogany table that reflected the grey sky, and air conditioning set just cold enough to make a person uncomfortable. I sat at the far end, with Ellie next to me. My daughter wore a simple navy dress, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. I placed my hand over hers, not to hold her down, but to ground her. Just breathe, I whispered to her. You do not have to say a word. You just have to witness it. Daniel arrived 5 minutes late. He strode in with the forced energy of a man trying to outrun a collapse. He was flanked by his lawyer, a sharp-looking man named Arthur Sterling, who carried a briefcase that likely cost more than my first car. Daniel looked at Ellie, his eyes softening into a practiced expression of concern. But Ellie looked straight ahead, focusing on the water pitcher in the center of the table. Maggie. Ellie, Daniel said, nodding as he pulled out his chair. I am glad we are finally doing this. It is time to put this ugliness behind us and focus on Ellie's recovery. Thomas Keegan sat at the head of the table. He opened a thin file folder and looked at Daniel's lawyer. Mr. Sterling? Thomas said formally. We are here to discuss the irregularities regarding the sale of the property at West Riverside Avenue and the subsequent dispersal of funds. Daniel leaned forward before his lawyer could speak. He looked confident, the king of his own little kingdom. He believed this was a settlement negotiation. He believed he was going to cut a check for a fraction of what he stole and walk away. Let's be honest here, Daniel said, his voice smooth. There are no irregularities. There was a crisis. Ellie was having episodes. She was spending money we did not have. I had to liquidate the asset to protect our capital. I have the power of attorney right here. He tapped a document on the table. I remained silent. I had instructed Thomas to let Daniel talk. In my experience, if you give a liar enough rope, he will eventually tie the knot himself. My client acted in the best interest of the marital estate. Mr. Sterling added, though he sounded slightly bored. We are prepared to offer a stipend for Mrs. Brooks's temporary housing, provided she agrees to a psychiatric evaluation. Ellie flinched. I squeezed her hand harder. Mr. Brooks, Thomas said, keeping his voice neutral. You claim the house was sold on October 20th to cover debts incurred by your wife. Is that correct? Absolutely, Daniel replied. We were drowning. I saved us. And the funds Thomas asked, where were they deposited into a holding trust? Daniel lied without blinking. Safe and secure. Then why? Thomas asked, sliding a piece of paper across the table. Did you transfer $180,000 to Apex Horizons on October 19th? That is one day before the sale was finalized? Daniel froze. The air in the room seemed to vanish. He blinked, his confident smile faltering for a fraction of a second. That was a bridge loan. Daniel stammered. To facilitate the closing. You don't understand high-level finance, Thomas. I understand math, Thomas said. And I understand that you cannot invest money you do not have unless you have already promised the asset to someone else. Daniel's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, shifted in his seat. He picked up the paper Thomas had slid over and adjusted his glasses. He looked at the document, then at Daniel. Daniel? Mr. Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave. You told me the funds were in an escrow account. What is Apex Horizons? It is an escrow. Sort of, Daniel said, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. Look, Arthur, it is complicated. The point is, I had the authority. Ellie gave me the authority. Did she? Thomas asked. Because the bank received the digital authorization on the 14th, but according to your own statement to the building manager, Ellie was already incapacitated and moved out on the 13th. How did she sign a document in front of a notary if she was not even in the building? Daniel looked at me then. He looked for the mother-in-law he thought he could manipulate. He looked for the woman who usually kept the peace. But I just stared back at him. My face, a mask of stone. Maggie, Daniel said, his voice cracking. Tell him. Tell him Ellie has been forgetting things. Tell him she gets confused. I am not here to tell stories. Daniel, I said, breaking my silence for the first time. I am here to read the logbook. Daniel turned back to his lawyer, but Mr. Sterling was moving his briefcase away from Daniel's side of the table. It was a subtle move, a physical distancing. The lawyer realized his client had lied to him. I think we need a recess. Mr. Sterling said, closing his folder. No recess, I said. I looked at Thomas and gave a single, sharp nod. The trap was full. It was time to close the door. Thomas did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He simply pressed a button on his laptop, and the room was filled with the sound of a busy coffee shop. The clatter of cups and the murmur of background conversation provided a sharp contrast to the absolute silence in the conference room. Then, Daniel's voice cut through the air, clear and undeniable. I adjusted the dates. I had to tweak the notary acknowledgement to match the bank's timeline. It was just paperwork. Maggie. Daniel went pale. The colour drained from his face so quickly it looked as if he might faint. He stared at the device on the table, as if it were a bomb that had just detonated. His lawyer, Mr. Sterling, closed his eyes and let out a long, defeated exhale. He knew exactly what that recording meant. It was not just an admission of bad judgment. It was a confession to a felony. This is illegal. Daniel sputtered. Standing up so abruptly, his chair knocked against the wall behind him. You recorded me without my knowledge, in Washington. That is inadmissible. Actually, Daniel, Thomas said, his voice cold and precise. You were in a public place. You had no reasonable expectation of privacy. And even if you did, the crime fraud exception applies here. You were admitting to the commission of a crime. Thomas then laid out the rest of the documents. He showed the emails from the notary, proving the dates had been altered. He showed the financial transfers, linking the house sale directly to the fraudulent investment scheme in Nevada. It was a chain of evidence so tight, it was suffocating. The power of attorney is void, Thomas declared, looking directly at Mr. Sterling. It was obtained through coercion and executed with fraudulent intent. Therefore, the sale of the apartment is invalid. We are filing a motion to vacate the deed transfer immediately. The new owners will be suing you. Daniel, the bank will be suing you. And since you admitted to forgery, I imagine the district attorney will want to have a conversation with you as well. Daniel looked around the room, his eyes wild. The mask of the successful businessman had completely disintegrated. In its place was a terrified, cornered animal. "Arthur, do something!" Daniel shouted at his lawyer. "Mr. Sterling stood up and began packing his briefcase. "I cannot help you, Daniel. I cannot suborn perjury, and I certainly cannot represent a client who lies to me about committing fraud. You are on your own." Daniel turned to me, his hands shaking. "Maggie, please. I did this for us. I did this for Ellie. You can't send me to jail. I am family. The word came from Ellie. She stood up slowly. Her legs were steady. She did not look at the floor. She did not look at me. She looked directly at the man who had spent 3 years gaslighting her into believing she was insane. "You aren't family." "Daniel," Ellie said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not waver. "Family protects you. Family doesn't sell your home while you are sleeping. Family doesn't make you feel like you are losing your mind just so they can steal your money. Ellie, baby, please. I can fix this." Daniel pleaded, reaching a hand out toward her. Ellie took a step back, her expression hardening. "Do not touch me," she said. "I am not the broken woman you dropped off at the curb 3 weeks ago. I am the woman who is going to watch you lose everything." She turned to Thomas. "File the papers. Mr. Keegan." "File everything?" I looked at my daughter. Her chin was up, her shoulders were back. The ghost that had been haunting her eyes was gone, replaced by a fierce, burning light. Daniel had tried to bury her, but he had forgotten that some things, when buried, do not rot. They grow. Ellie was back, and as I looked at the man collapsing into his chair across the table, weeping into his hands, I knew the war was over. We had won. The dismantling of Daniel Brooks was efficient, brutal, and entirely legal. It happened with the same cold precision he had tried to use against my daughter. Only this time, the paperwork was real. Within 48 hours of the mediation, the temporary restraining orders on his assets were converted into permanent freezes. The partners at Apex Horizons, the men he thought were his ticket to the big leagues, did not even bother to return his calls. They simply dissolved the LLC and vanished into the ether of bad debt, leaving Daniel holding the bag for every single promise he had made. Thomas Keegan handled the final negotiations. We did not get the apartment back. The couple who had bought it were innocent bystanders in Daniel's fraud, and dragging them through a year of litigation seemed like a cruelty Ellie did not want to inflict. Instead, we forced a settlement. Between the liquidation of Daniel's remaining personal assets and the insurance payout from the title company regarding the fraudulent deed, Ellie received a check. It was for $420,000. It was enough to buy a small house outright. It was enough to start over. But as Ellie held the check in her hands, she did not look like a winner. She looked like a survivor surveying the wreckage. "It feels like blood money," she said, her voice barely audible. "It is restitution," I corrected her gently. "It is the cost of your freedom. Eleanor, take it." Daniel left Spokane on a rainy Thursday. There were no more suits, no more confident strides. I watched from my car parked down the block as he loaded a few cardboard boxes into his leased sedan, which I knew was due to be repossessed by the end of the month. He looked older. He looked small. He did not look back at the building that had been his kingdom. He just got in the car and drove west, disappearing into the grey traffic. He was not going to prison yet, as the civil fraud case was still pending. But he was leaving with his reputation incinerated In the business world, that is a death sentence. We packed Ellie's things the next morning. It did not take long. A life can be reduced to suitcases frighteningly fast. We drove back to Tacoma in a silence that was different from the drive up. It was not heavy with dread anymore. It was the quiet of exhaustion. When we pulled into my driveway, the house looked exactly as I had left it, but I felt like I had been gone for a decade. I set Ellie up in her old bedroom. We put fresh sheets on the bed, and I made a pot of vegetable soup. We moved through the house like two ghosts, learning how to be solid again. That first night, I sat in my armchair in the living room while Ellie slept upstairs. The silence of the suburbs usually comforted me, but tonight, it felt heavy. My hands, which had been steady throughout the investigation, finally began to tremble. The adrenaline that had fueled me for weeks was draining away, leaving behind a deep, aching fatigue. I felt every single one of my 56 years. I closed my eyes and listened to the rhythmic hum of the refrigerator. I had won. My daughter was safe. The predator was gone. But I knew that the real work was just beginning. Restoring a bank account is easy. It is just math. Restoring a human being's capacity to trust is a much longer, harder project. Mom, I opened my eyes. Ellie was standing at the bottom of the stairs, wrapped in an old quilt. She looked young, fragile, but standing on her own 2 feet. I couldn't sleep, she said softly. I kept thinking he was going to walk through the door. He will never walk through that door again, I said, my voice firm despite my exhaustion. I changed the locks on your life, Ellie. He does not have the key anymore. She managed a weak smile, the first real one I had seen in a month. Thank you, she whispered, for coming for me, for being you. Go to sleep, I said. I will be right here. I watched her walk back up the stairs. I stayed in the chair, guarding the house, guarding the silence. The battle was over. But the sentry does not leave her post just because the sun has gone down. The civil suit for fraud was filed on a brisk Tuesday morning, 6 months after the mediation. It was not a quiet affair. Thomas made sure the filing was comprehensive, listing every altered date, every diverted dollar, and every breach of fiduciary duty. Daniel tried one last time to negotiate. He sent a long, rambling email through his new, court-appointed attorney, offering a payment plan that would span 20 years. He promised he had changed. He begged for mercy, citing his inability to find work in the finance sector. I did not delete the email. I printed it out and placed it in the file. "Do we respond?" Thomas asked me over the phone. "No," I said, my voice flat. "We do not negotiate with arsonists after they have already burned the house down. Proceed with the trial." The final signatures for the divorce and the civil settlement took place 2 weeks later. This time, Daniel was not present. He was legally barred from being in the same room as Ellie due to the restraining order we had secured based on his harassment. Ellie sat at the heavy oak table in Thomas's office. I watched her hands. 6 months ago. They had trembled so violently she could barely hold a cup of tea. Now, her grip on the pen was firm. She read every clause. She checked every figure. "Are you ready?" I asked her. Ellie looked up at me. Her eyes were clear. "I'm not just ready. Mom, I'm finished." She signed her name, Eleanor Holloway, dropping the name Brooks as if it were a heavy coat she no longer needed to wear. In that moment, I realized something profound. I used to think revenge was about destruction. I thought it was about burning the enemy's fields. But as I looked at my daughter, I understood that true revenge is simply prevention. It is building a wall so high and so thick that the person who hurt you can never, ever climb over it again. It is not about teaching them a lesson. It is about ensuring they never get the chance to teach you another one. Our relationship had changed, too. I was no longer just her mother, and she was no longer just my child. We were veterans of the same war. There was a new respect between us, a silent acknowledgement of the strength it took to survive. A month later, I walked into my office at Northline Transit Group and placed a single sheet of paper on my boss's desk. It was my resignation. I had spent 30 years managing other people's chaos. It was time to manage my own peace. The company threw me a party with cheap sheet cake and lukewarm punch. But as I walked out to the parking lot for the last time, carrying a box of personal effects, I felt lighter than air. Ellie moved to Portland the following week. She found a job as a project coordinator for a non-profit organization. It was a smaller city, a smaller salary, but it was hers. She was building a life that no one could sell out from under her. As for Daniel, he did not go to prison, though the threat still hangs over him like a storm cloud. He settled the fraud case for a sum that will keep him in debt for the next 15 years. He lives in a studio apartment in Idaho now, working in sales for a trucking company. He is a small man in a small life. He knows that if he ever tries to leverage a relationship again, his name is permanently flagged in the court systems of 3 states. He carries the scar of his greed, a mark that will never fade. I still live in my quiet house in Tacoma. I still drink my coffee black, but I sleep better now. I have learned that betrayal whispers. Yes, but justice speaks in a clear, unwavering voice. And the man who thought he could trick a mother learned the hardest lesson of all: you can steal a house, but you can never steal the foundation. Thank you so much for tuning in to this story. I'm curious, where are you folks listening from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I'd love to connect with you. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to the Nora Revenge Stories channel, smash that like button, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.